In California, 4.8% of the population is transgender. This meaning, at some point in your life, you will probably meet or encounter someone who is transgender and you might not even realize it. Over the years, we as Californians have begun to become more inclusive and aware of our pronouns and began to accept everyone for who they are. Sadly, however, this isn't the case for everyone. The transgender community, still to this day, faces hatred, adversity, violence, disadvantages, etc., that one could not even possibly begin to imagine. The issues are that the transgender community is faced with not just hatred, but also many, many disadvantages. In their lives, I will discuss what these are. The first thing that I noticed when doing my research was that the transgender community faces much more hate crime as compared to the rest of the cisgender population. For example, in this image above, it shows that since 2013, gender identity hate crimes have been rapidly increasing. The FBI defines a hate crime as a criminal offense against a person or properly motivated, in whole or part by offenders biased against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. However, even more disheartening was this Washington Post showing how 2021 has been the most deadly year in history for transgender people. The transgender community doesn't just face more hatred. It also describes that Delaja White wears earrings with a photo of her late friend Quaisha Hardy on May 12th in Baton Rouge. Hardy was murdered in 2020. 2021 has set a new record for violent deaths of transgender and non-binary people, according to the Human Rights Campaign. The transgender community is far more inclined to violence because of these hate crimes. Now that I have talked about the violence and hate, I will talk more on the mental health aspect of the transgender community. The transgender community had a twofold to threefold increased risk of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, self-harm, without lethal intent, and both inpatient. Here is an infographic to further explain where I'm coming from. This explains the transgender teens that need safe and supportive schools to help with their mental health. 27% feel unsafe at or going to from school. 35% are bullied at school. 35% attempt suicide. In this infographic, it displays a set of statistics as well regarding health. Here is another infographic that displays a set of statistics regarding health and self-harm. I will allow you to read this for a second. I also found in a study conducted by the National Transgender Discrimination Survey a report on health. It showed that a staggering 41% of respondents reported attempting suicide compared to 1.6% of the general population, with unemployment, low income, and sexual and physical assault raising the risk factor significantly. It's not just so. In this slide, I will be providing two infographics. In these two infographics, it shows that the transgender community is 2 times more likely to think about suicide than the average person. It also shows that 41% of transgender adults have attempted suicide. Because of all the violence and hate on top of the mental health and self-harm, the transgender community is also at much, much more risk of death. This photo represents just a few humans that we have lost due to these social norms of violence in the transgender community. Out of respect, I will give a moment of silence for the humans that we have lost. In this infographic here, it shows a monitored murder monitoring of trans murdering, and it is truly disheartening. As you can see, all these issues pile up into more and more issues. Saying a harmful thing to someone causes so much more damage than one could possibly imagine. This is not even considering the amount of lives that are taken every single year, all because someone wants to be defined as a different gender. The worst part is that after all the facts that I have given, I still haven't even scratched the surface of my argument here. How much more issues are there? I'm going to talk about the disadvantages. First, I will talk about the medical issues in the transgender community. First is the refusal of care. In the survey I discussed earlier, it also found that the refusal of care, 19% of our sample reported being refused care due to their transgender or gender non-conforming status, with even higher numbers among people of color in the picture I am about to show you. It displays an image that represents the Trump administration eliminating federal protections against discrimination in healthcare for transgender people. Because of this refusal of care, transgenders are also more inclined into taking unprescribed drugs, which is very dangerous. The reason this happens is because the transgender community wants to sometimes take hormonal pills, but sometimes aren't prescribed because of refusal of care. Here, I also found that 9.1% of the transgender people took unprescribed pills for hormones, which is ultimately dangerous and even relates back to my topic. The next disadvantage faced with the transgender community is that they deal with more unemployment and low income. These two images above are great examples of this. The first image I'm about to show you is showing the transgender people significantly go to college less, and the second image shows the difference in employment rate between the transgender community. As you can see, the transgender community is much more at a disadvantage than the rest of the population. Finally, to wrap this up, I will be discussing the trauma that the transgender community faces. After all, hatred, disadvantages, I haven't stated in this informational video because I think it's safe to say that you can see how trauma would be a big problem in the community. I found out that in this article titled Trauma in Transgender Populations, Risk, Resilience, and Clinical Care by Lauren Mizock and Thomas Lewis, it states that transphobia, prejudice, discrimination, and gender-related violence due to negative attitudes towards the transgender community may pose a risk factor. I will also be going to display this infographic to further explain my point. It states that 4.5% of the US is LGBT. Of them, 1 in 3 experience a mental illness, 96% more than heterosexuals. I will allow you to read the rest for a few seconds. In the end, I believe that us humans need to do better. I just gave a ton of examples on the hatred and disadvantage that the transgender community faces every single day. They go through so much and many people don't even realize it. I think we are heading in the right direction, but we are not even close to scratching the surface to treating everyone as equals. And in the end, I think that's what people need to realize, that we are all equals. We are all humans, and discriminating one another just because of how we define is idiotic and hatred, when instead we could be loving everyone and spreading positivity in the world. I have faith in humanity to do better as time progresses, but right now we need to focus on these issues. To conclude, here is a works cited of all the research that I used.